Welcome to Design Notes, the show in which we find out how the games you love get onto your table. In this week's show, I speak to probably the most renowned artist on the scene right now, Ian O'Toole. We talk about how he got into the industry and how tech-savvy you need to be, among many other things. If you have any comments, please feel free to pop them into the box below, and I hope you enjoy the show. So, welcome to this new episode of Designer Notes, and I'm welcoming possibly the busiest at least, person in the board game, graphic design and art world at the moment, all the way from sunny Australia, and this is Ian O'Toole. Ian, thank you a lot for coming on the show.
Hey Ben, thanks for having me.
So, this is my first question, and this is the first question I ask everybody, and I don't want your natural sense of modesty to kick in, so, be as bombastic as you wish, but when did you know you were good at what you do?
Oh man. When did I know I was good? I mean, I knew I was pretty good at drawing from a fairly early age. Just because, my peers would tell me and teachers would tell me and things like that. As regards gaming, if you want to come as recent as that, probably around about the time maybe that The Gallerist came out or that Nemo's War came out. They both came out in the same year, and that was a year of a fair amount of decent feedback. So that's kind of would have been the first time that I kind of thought, there might be something in this.
And what was it particularly about those projects? Was it the feedback you got, or was it the actual work? You just looked at it, you got the games through the post and went, "Oh, well done, Ian."
They both got really good feedback, which was lovely. Also to an extent, seeing the games. I saw The Gallerist on my first trip to Essen. Was the first time I saw the production copy, and it was lovely because it was the first time I met Vital in person. It was the first time seeing a game of mine produced to that degree that Eagle Gryphon does, and I was not expecting that. I actually wasn't aware with The Gallerist that it was going to be such a lavish production. So yeah, that was a lovely surprise to see that all laid out on the table at Essen. It's quite pleasing.
I can understand with a game designer being sort of shocked when they see the production copy of their game because, they work in the mechanics, they work in index cards and blank pieces of paper, whereas you're the person who orchestrates the look. So what is it about seeing the game in production that exceeds or defeats your expectations when you actually see it?
Well, it's literally the quality of the production, the quality of the printing. With The Gallerist in particular in the Eagle Gryphon games, it's a silly thing, but they use really thick cardboard. That's much thicker than most games, so it just feels more substantial and solid, and it's really boring, nerdy stuff like how accurate is the cutting, and just stuff like that.
And so I got a two-part question here. So what was the journey that got you into being a graphic designer and a graphic artist? And then secondly, how did you come from there into the murky world of board game production?
So becoming a graphic designer, I had always been, I guess, more of an illustrator growing up, just because I like to draw a lot. I didn't really know what graphic design was. But the art that I always really gravitated towards was always commercial art, so comic books and editorial artwork and children's books and things like that. So I didn't really have much of an interest in pursuing fine art as a career path. And when it came time to look at college options, graphic design kind of jumped out. A lot of it, honestly, was I thought I could get a job with it, whereas fine art, who knows if
Mm.
who knows how that will go. Graphic design, I could look on websites and I could see job applications for apply here for a graphic design job. So I thought, oh, that's probably a bit more sensible. Gaming wise, as have been lucky enough in the graphic design jobs that I've had to be able to maintain my skills as an illustrator as well. Um, just with the type of jobs that I've had, and uh, starting to work in board games just came from the fact that I'm a gamer, and when I started to work for myself, I decided it would be just fun to try it out and to see how it would go. And then through a series of kind of fortuitous uh, events, I ended up working on some games such as The Gallerist and Nemo's War and A Study in Emerald, the second edition of A Study in Emerald, all in quite quick succession. And those games got, a fair bit of decent press, um, and it just went from there.
I mean, can you be a good graphic? Because you're a graphic designer who can clearly draw. You do the graphic design for the games and you do the art for the games. Can you be a graphic designer? Are there great graphic designers out there who aren't very good at drawing?
Yeah, tons. Yeah, in fact, probably most. I think, at least in my experience, most graphic designers aren't. Drawing isn't really part of their skill set as well.
And so, how are you able to keep your eye in with the art, being a professional graphic designer? Then,
well, I'm a professional both. So illustrator and graphic designer, and to me, honestly, and for most of my career, I haven't really put much thought into separating the two very much. I mean, obviously I understand the separation between the two, and I have worked on some projects purely as an illustrator and some purely as a graphic designer, with other illustrators and things like that. Um, but for the most part, the skills kind of blend together for me because it's kind of just become the way that I work. Um, yeah, does that answer your question?
yeah, sure.
Yeah.
So if you want to be a professional footballer, you've got to go out and you've got to practice passing for 2 hours every day. If you're a musician, you've got to sit in front of your cello and you've got to do scales every day. Boring, repetitious stuff that gets you good, that gets muscle memory. What kind of stuff does an illustrator and graphic designer have to do to get to a professional standard?
Wow. Well, an illustrator is easy. An illustrator needs to draw all the time, draw and draw and draw and draw, and that never stops. A graphic designer, for me, it was just work, and it's not. There's no real like drills that you do, at least that I can call to mind. But it's just experience and work. So working on things professionally when you can, and on your own things, more so at the start when you don't have much professional work. Just finding things that you want to work on and doing it for practice and learning that way. You learn by doing basically with both of those disciplines.
So, you're well known in the games world, and especially for your Eagle Griffin stuff. Is this your primary, profession within the graphic design and art world now, or do you still do other stuff that isn't board games?
The only stuff that I do now that isn't board games is birthday party invites for my kids. That's it. And that's been the case for the last 4 years, maybe 5 now, at least 4.
And there's been a lot of talk about the golden age of board games and the explosion of sort of board games over the last decade. Has your inbox been getting fuller and fuller over the 4 years you've been in gaming?
Yeah, definitely. And especially this year. I don't know how much the year of 2020 has the specifics of the year of 2020 has contributed to that, but yeah, it's definitely been on the increase. It's just been an upward trajectory for me so far.
And so, okay, we've spoken before because you did my podcast, and you talked a lot about how being a gamer helps you with the process of graphic design and art for games. So can you give us an overview of, say you've got a new Vital Lacerda game, and what is the process of getting that to someone else's table and then being able to read the board and know what things do?
It's a process I'm in right now with Weather Machine, which is his next game. The process is, well, the first thing is to play the game, to learn the game. Now, sometimes that's me making my own prototype. Sometimes with Vital, he builds all his prototypes on Tabletopia, so he'll just teach me online. With Vital's game specifically, I usually get involved a little bit earlier in the process than I would normally. So the game's not necessarily 100% done when I start looking at it and thinking about it and all that sort of stuff. Yeah, so once I've played it, there's just a period of thinking and sketching about the game, and it's just me turning it over in my head and thinking, how can we do this? How can we do that? How should the board be laid out? And that's just an exercise in trying to break down hierarchies more than anything else. So thinking in a way that when this finished board gets put on the table, what's the most important thing on the board? And how does it relate to everything else? And how, it's just, how do each of these elements relate? How can we make it easier to understand by making things that operate in a similar manner, by presenting them in a similar manner so you intuitively understand that there's a link there. All of that. There's a lot of questions that need to be asked about that sort of stuff, and especially with with games as complex as Vital's games. So that's kind of just churned around and sketched. I will discuss ideas with Vital for a while. And the next stage is to build a bare bones framework for that. So there's no artwork at all. It's just boxes and circles, and it's all line work. And it's just putting those spaces into real dimensions, right? So we say, okay, our board is this size. A cube is this size. How much space do we need to put 20 cubes on the board, or whatever we need to do? So it's kind of taking the sketchbook stuff and putting real dimensions on it. And from there, it really depends on the game. Sometimes I'll start on iconography. If it's a very icon-heavy game, that's been the way with Weather Machine. So Weather Machine is at that stage kind of now, where it's I just played a physical prototype of it at the weekend, but it's a physical prototype that's, again, just lines and boxes and icons. There's nothing else. And if that works, which it did mostly, we'll address whatever needs to be fixed, etc., etc. And at that point, I'll start to move on to making it look like it's actually going to look in the end. Because at that point, the scaffolding is strong, and I can just drape all the thematic stuff around it, basically. And that's typically the process that I follow.
And so how important for you, because you're a gamer, and you like heavy games, and you must like Vital Lacerda games, I assume, because you've played a lot of them a lot, right? How important for you are those thematic elements, the art and the nice graphic design? Can you enjoy a game that's devoid of all that? I guess my question is, what is the difference between you playing it with just your line work and then getting the final copy and playing it with all the beautiful stuff on the lovely cardboard?
I can absolutely, personally, as a gamer, I can enjoy a game with very minimal visual presentation, as long as it's not, the game isn't obscured by the visual presentation. I'm reasonably happy. I prefer things to look beautiful, but they don't. Personally, they don't have to for me. Um, the difference between playing it, the bare bones version, and playing it with all the artwork, it's just a more, um, it's just more engaging. Is even if I'm the one who's produced all those images, it still does work. It's a the game has more of a sense of identity, has more of a sense of place. And all of those are just different parts of what we generally refer to as theme. But it's a very amorphous term.
Hmm.
But yeah, it just gives the game personality. Is really what it is. The game speaks to you a little bit more in a weird way. It gives you chances to react to it and play off it a little bit more, and yeah, it just has more personality.
And so, if someone were to say, what is Ian O'Toole famous for? They would say it's the Vital Lacerda games. That's your sort of place in the hobby. That's, people know the big ones. How did you get that gig? How did you start illustrating Vital's games?
I wrote him an email. I wrote him an email. At the when I was starting to work in board games, I very briefly investigated the possibilities of working in a publishing in the publishing end of in the industry as well. And I really liked Vital's games. I knew that he had some that were in development, but I hadn't heard who was publishing them or whatever. So I just sent him an email. I just sent him an email, and I said exactly that. I said, I really like your games. Do you have any that aren't spoken for? Etc. etc. And he was kind enough to write back, which still amazes me. And he said that I think the game that I inquired about was Lisboa, I think, because there was a BGG entry for it and nothing else, basically. And he said that, well, these games are already licensed to a publisher or contracted to a publisher. But he said, but I do have a game that's coming out real soon, and we don't have an artist for it, and we need it real quick. And that was The Gallerist. And he said, can you do that? Because he had obviously had a look at my website, I think. And I said, yeah, and that was that. So happenstance, and just, yeah.
And so what is it about your workflow, your ability that gels so well with Vital's working style and Vital's games?
I think it's because I obsess over usability and iconography more so than I think he likes the fact that I can move around different illustration styles to suit different different games and different settings and all that sort of stuff. But for me, where we spend most of our time working collaboratively is in the visual layout and the iconography development. That would be. So I think that's probably where I'm most suited to his games, because they're so complicated that I just get obsessive over making it make sense. And how can I make this be easier to learn and easier to remember if you've learned it but it's been a while. Just things like that, basically. It's a big juicy puzzle for me to work out.
And there used to be a time back in the mists of time that if you worked with someone, you saw them in the flesh fairly regularly, you know. And now we live in a globalized world with the internet where, you know, you live in Australia, Vital lives in Portugal. And even if times weren't as strange as they are, you know, you're not popping round each other's house for a cup of coffee every week. How is it when you actually get to meet these designers and these publishers when you go to Essen or something, and you get to meet them in person, these people you've been Skyping with for the last 6 months?
It's great. It's it's really, really good. I would always recommend the people who want to be illustrators or graphic designers or game designers as well, although I don't really know much about that. To go to conventions and meet people and, you know, face to face and all of that, because it's, you know, myself and Vital talk all the time. I usually just in text form. Um, but it's just not the same as having a real conversation. And when you have real conversations, especially in an environment like Essen, where everyone's thinking about games 100% of the time, the whole city is basically thinking about games. Then it's a really good environment for just ideas to crop up out of nowhere that would never ever happen otherwise, you know, and things like that. So it's really good. I really missed it this year, not being able to get over there. So I'm looking forward to getting back to it.
So I am one of these people. I'm of a certain age. I'm not a digital native, and I am technologically possibly the most inept person I know. I mean, being a professional illustrator and graphic designer now, to what extent is it being, you know, very familiar with software and being able to manipulate computers?
You need to be able to do it, but it's by no means the most important element of the job. And I think a lot of people put too much stock in, I can use Photoshop or InDesign, so I'm now a graphic designer. It's not, it's the same as I can pick up a paintbrush, so I'm now an artist. It's not, it doesn't work. It's a cliched thing that I was taught in college, but, you know, it's just a tool like anything else. It's another paintbrush, it's another pencil, and sure, it's ones that we use a lot these days. So you do, I mean, look, the reality is you do need to know how to use software. Certainly for a graphic designer, if you're just an illustrator, there are illustrators who paint traditionally, photograph or scan, and have very minimal computer involvement at all. There are plenty of illustrators who work that way. For a graphic designer, it's a little different because you're responsible for creating the end artwork file that will actually go to a printer and be produced. So there are certain standards that you need to understand and all of that sort of stuff. But it's all stuff that can be learned, right? And it's all stuff that changes all the time, right? So I mean, if I took 2 years off and I came back, I'd have to learn probably a bunch of stuff to be up to date. But yeah, ultimately the software is, it's as a graphic designer, it is obviously essential, but it doesn't teach you what to do with it, like any tool, right? You need to know what to do with it, basically.
So if the programs are just the tools and they're not the core of the thing, what is the core of the thing?
For a graphic designer specifically?
Yeah, for both artists and graphic designers.
Well, for an illustrator, it's all sorts of things. It's knowledge of composition, it's color theory, it's muscle memory, it's knowledge of anatomy, and it's just practice and practice and practice. It's how to all of the tips and all of the elements that you can bring together to create an effect that you're looking for, or an emotion, or to evoke something, right? It's easy for someone to write in a brief, this image needs to evoke loneliness, for instance. But to be able to actually do that in practical terms, there's a lot of skills that you need to bring to bear to be able to do that, and there's many ways to approach that. So to know which one. For a Um, for a graphic designer, it's probably much the same, I think. Yeah, there's really not a huge amount of difference between, in that regard. There's not a huge amount of difference between the two. I don't think.
And so, you talk about you'd be quite happy to play games that are index cards and sort of white pieces of paper. And there's very few that would. I mean, I'm one of them. I've played prototypes, and I find it insufferable often. But so to what degree do you think you're responsible for the thematic immersion of the players of a game?
It depends a little bit on the game, I think, but fairly responsible, I think. Certainly for the initial. Generating that initial interest in a theme and a setting, and in generating initial excitement and all that sort of stuff, and also in communicating to the player how thematic this game is. I think that's quite an important thing from a product design and a marketing point of view for a game to kind of accurately portray the experience that it's going to give you, right? So if for instance, if a game is hugely produced and it has miniatures everywhere and dice everywhere, but it turns out to be a dry economic game, there's a disconnect there, right? And a lot of people are going to be disappointed who are expecting a different experience. So that's a big part of it. Sometimes the mechanisms will be very thematically designed, right? So in that case, I just need to find ways to support that. But ultimately, for me, it's establishing setting and a sense of place. The things we talked about before, a sense of place, and giving something that's really nice to do, if I can do it, is giving players these little thematic hooks to hang the experience around. I'm trying to think of an example of this. A good example would be the player boards in the Gallerist. So when you in the prototype, the pieces of artwork were just square tiles with a picture of the artwork on it, and to some degree that's what they are now. But when you take them and you put them in your gallery, you actually flip them over and it creates a tableau that looks like your gallery, and it's got little visitors walking around and sort of stuff. That's really only there as a thematic hook, right? It's just, I'm building my gallery. It feels like it's my gallery. I can see the paintings and the sculptures that I put in. There's people walking around enjoying it, all that sort of stuff. So that's the sort of stuff I always try to look for, those sort of thematic embellishments that both make sense with what you have to do in the game. So you kind of go, oh, I get why I'm doing this, as opposed to I'm being told to do this and I don't understand why. But also things that evoke a response in the player, right? Agricola is a great example of this. People always feel proud when they do well in Agricola, and that's because it's a hard game, but it's also, you've built this thing and it's got lots of stuff on it, right? If you've got a player board at the end of Agricola that has lots of stuff on it, you've done fairly well and you feel proud. Whereas it's very visually obvious if you've done a terrible, terrible job because it's barren. So that's the sort of thing that I always look for. How can we reinforce the theme just in a visual sense? Yeah.
So we've already discussed Weather Machine. Is there anything else that you've got coming out in the future that you can discuss with the audience?
I don't think so. Oh, I have a game called Pampero, which is on its way, which is a game about it's another fairly heavy Euro economic game. It's about building wind farms in Uruguay, which is quite exciting. It's a really nice game. Other than that, plenty of stuff, but nothing that I can think of right now that I'm allowed to talk about.
So I've just got a couple of more questions, and it's really interesting how, as board gaming has become more popular, I think if we'd have gone back 10 years ago, this question wouldn't have been asked askable because people wouldn't have known who the people are who were responsible for the art in games. But I think that's really changed. So, you're at Essen, you go out for a drink in the evening to Fitzpatrick's, and you're walking back from the toilet and you hear a group of gamers sat around a table and you hear your name mentioned. So you sidle into the corner and you eavesdrop. What do you hope they're saying about you?
I would cover my ears and move along is probably what I would actually do. What do
It's
I
yes and. This is an improv.
Yeah, sure. What do I hope they're saying about me? I don't know that they like. Actually, probably the best thing I could hear was that the work that I had done made the experience of learning and playing a game easier. That's probably the best case scenario.
Well, I mean, I don't want to come across as fawning or anything, but I was playing Age of Steam the other night, and we all agreed that the Age of Steam boards are super clean and super easy to use.
Thank you very much.
So my last question then is, why is gaming good?
Why is gaming good? Because why is gaming good? I mean, personally, for me, gaming is really good fun. It gives me a job that I love, and I can do work that I never thought I'd be able to do. If just the scope and type of work, and have autonomy that I never thought I'd be able to have. So from that respect, it's very good for me. But in general, I think it's good because it's a physical, mostly, again, usually, a physical, real life, in person activity. All the usual things. It's good, apparently good for your brain. That hasn't taken root yet with me, but it's just a really nice way to share time with other people. It's very versatile. So there's lots of different ways to share different types of times with lots of different types of people because of the scope of the creativity. It's also on that just a hugely creative industry, full of ridiculously passionate and intelligent people, which is great.
Brilliant. Well, Ian, thank you ever so much for giving over your time, and hopefully we'll be able to see each other in person at some point in the future.
Yeah, I look forward to it. Thanks, Ben.